The sound of a slap echoed through the first-class cabin. Time stopped. Every passenger froze mid-motion, some with drinks halfway to their lips, others with fingers hovering over tablets. The flight attendant's hand hung in the air, her face twisted with disgust as she towered over the 9-year-old black girl whose cheek now burned bright red. "You people always make a mess," the attendant hissed, her badge glinting under the cabin lights. Ms. Aldridge, 22-year veteran. The girl's father, Cliff Warren, stood paralyzed for exactly 2 seconds, the time it took for his brain to process that a stranger had just struck his daughter. His hands clenched into fists, his breath caught in his throat. But before he could speak, another voice cut through the cabin. "I suggest you step away from that child immediately." The voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight, the kind that comes from someone accustomed to being obeyed. A man in the second row had lowered his newspaper. Mid-50s, broad-shouldered, with a small pin on his lapel that most wouldn't recognize. But Ms. Aldridge recognized it. The blood drained from her face as she realized who had witnessed her assault. FBI Director Alan Masters. What she didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that this wasn't just about a juice spill or a moment of racial hatred. This slap was the first visible thread of a conspiracy that would soon expose a nationwide network of white supremacists who had infiltrated America's transportation system. And they had already marked Cliff Warren for destruction. Welcome to a story that will make you question every uniform you trust. I'm Victory, and today we're diving into one of the most disturbing cases of organized racism in recent American history. Before we continue, I need to ask, have you ever witnessed discrimination and felt powerless to stop it? The father in today's story faced that moment, but with consequences none of us could predict. Let me take you back to Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, where successful black entrepreneur Cliff Warren and his daughter Mariah were about to board a flight that would change their lives forever. Cliff had every reason to be proud that morning. After years of grinding, his cybersecurity firm had finally landed a multi-million-dollar government contract. This wasn't just a business win, it was validation. Proof that a black-owned tech company could compete at the highest levels. He'd brought Mariah along because she'd begged to see Washington, D.C., and because, since losing her mother 3 years earlier, he rarely denied her anything that brought joy to those intelligent brown eyes. "Daddy, will we see the White House?" Mariah asked, bouncing on her toes as they waited in the priority boarding line. "We might," Cliff smiled, straightening her backpack strap. "But first I have to sign those papers. Then it's all about you, princess." What Cliff didn't notice was how the gate agent's eyes narrowed when she saw them approach the first-class line. How she double-checked their boarding passes with unusual scrutiny. How she whispered something to Ms. Aldridge, the senior flight attendant who would later assault his child. They were being marked. As they settled into their plush first-class seats, Mariah's excitement bubbled over. She'd never flown first class before. The wide seats, the extra legroom, the special attention. It was all new and wonderful. "Look, Daddy. They gave me my own headphones," she exclaimed, carefully unwrapping the plastic package. Cliff helped her adjust them, then reached for his briefcase to review contract details before landing. The meeting in D.C. was scheduled just 3 hours after their arrival. Everything had to be perfect. That's when Mariah's apple juice slipped from her hands. The plastic cup hit the carpet, splashing droplets onto Ms. Aldridge's shoes as she passed by their row. "I'm sorry," Mariah said immediately, her voice small but clear. Ms. Aldridge stopped. Looked down at her shoes. Then at Mariah. Then at Cliff. "Control your child," she said coldly. Cliff was already reaching for napkins. "It was an accident. We'll clean it up." "This is first class," Ms. Aldridge continued as if he hadn't spoken. "Not a playground." The implication hung in the air. You don't belong here. Cliff felt the familiar weight settle on his shoulders, the burden of having to be extra polite, extra accommodating, extra everything just to be treated with basic respect. "Mariah, help me clean this up," he said calmly, handing her some napkins. That's when it happened. As Mariah leaned forward to help, Ms. Aldridge's hand shot out and struck her across the face. The slap wasn't a gentle tap. It was deliberate, forceful, meant to humiliate. And in the stunned silence that followed, Director Masters' voice cut through like a blade. What happened next would expose a truth far more disturbing than a single racist incident. Because Ms. Aldridge wasn't just a flight attendant with prejudice. She was a messenger. If you're watching this and thinking this couldn't happen in modern America, I need you to hit that subscribe button right now. Because the reality of what Black Americans face every day is something everyone needs to understand. The FBI investigation that followed would reveal communications between Ms. Aldridge and a network of white supremacists who had specifically targeted Cliff Warren. They knew about his government contract. They knew his flight details. They knew his daughter would be with him. And they had planned to make an example of him. Mr. Warren, Director Masters said later that day, after the flight had been canceled and all passengers rebooked. What happened today wasn't random. We've been tracking this group for months. Cliff stared at him, still holding ice to Mariah's cheek. What group? They call themselves Guardians of Service. They've infiltrated airlines, hotels, security firms, anywhere they can exert power over who gets service and who doesn't. But they've escalated recently. From discrimination to intimidation. And now, apparently, to physical assault. Mariah whimpered, pressing closer to her father. Why us? Cliff asked, though part of him already knew. Director Masters' eyes were grave. Your government contract. They don't want black-owned businesses succeeding at that level. And they're willing to go to extreme lengths to stop it. If you've made it this far in the video, you're about to discover how deep this conspiracy went, and how it threatened not just Cliff's business but his daughter's life. Drop a comment below if you've ever witnessed discrimination in a service industry. Your stories matter, and they help expose the reality too many people face. Now, let me show you what happened when Cliff Warren decided to fight back against a system designed to destroy him. Before we dive deeper into what happened after that shocking slap, you need to understand who Cliff Warren was, and why he became a target. 42 years old, with a trimmed beard showing hints of gray, Cliff had built his cybersecurity firm, SecureNext Solutions, from nothing. Growing up in East Oakland, he taught himself coding on a second-hand computer while his mother worked double shifts as a nurse. By 16 he was fixing computers for neighbors. By 20 he'd earned a scholarship to MIT. But the path wasn't smooth. They'll never let you compete at the top, his first business mentor had warned him. The tech world talks diversity but walks discrimination. Cliff had nodded politely, then ignored the advice completely. He refused to accept limitations placed on him because of his skin color. After graduating with honors, he turned down lucrative offers from Silicon Valley giants to start his own firm. The early years were brutal. Potential clients would seem interested until meeting him in person. Investors would ghost him after learning SecureNext was black-owned. Daddy, why are you still working? 10-year-old Mariah stood in the doorway of his home office, rubbing sleep from her eyes. It was 2 a.m. Because dreams don't work unless you do, princess, he replied, the glow of his laptop illuminating his exhausted face. That was 3 years ago, before Vanessa, his wife and co-founder, died suddenly from an undiagnosed heart condition. Before Cliff became both mother and father to their daughter. Before he had to rebuild not just his business but his entire life. The government contract that brought them to that fateful flight represented everything he'd fought for. The Department of Homeland Security had selected SecureNext to overhaul cybersecurity protocols for 3 federal agencies. A $40 million deal that would put his company on the map. What Cliff didn't know was that his success had triggered alarm bells in dark corners of America. A black-owned firm handling federal security? Not on our watch. These words, later discovered in encrypted messages between members of the Guardians of Service, revealed the true nature of what Cliff and Mariah faced. This wasn't just about a flight attendant's momentary racism. This was calculated, planned, targeted. If you're watching this video and haven't subscribed yet, take a moment to hit that button. Stories like Cliff's need to be heard, and your subscription helps them reach more people who need to understand the reality of systemic racism in America. Now let's talk about Mariah. At 9 years old, Mariah Warren was already showing signs of following in her father's footsteps. Brilliant, curious, and fearless, she'd won her school's science fair with a cybersecurity project that impressed even Cliff's senior engineers. She gets her brains from her mother, Cliff would tell people proudly. But since losing Vanessa, Mariah had become more attached to her father. She'd wake up panicked if he wasn't home. She'd call him multiple times during school trips. The thought of losing her remaining parent haunted her young mind, which made what happened on that plane all the more traumatic. The morning of the flight, Mariah had been unusually quiet as they packed. Everything okay, princess? Cliff asked, zipping her small suitcase. She nodded, then hesitated. Daddy, do people in Washington like black people? The question hit Cliff like a punch to the gut. At 9 years old, his daughter was already conscious of how the world might see her differently. Most people are good, Mariah, he said carefully. But some people have fear in their hearts about anyone different from them. That's not about us, that's about them. She seemed to consider this. Mom said we have to be twice as good. Cliff swallowed hard. Vanessa had always been direct with Mariah about the realities of being black in America. Your mom was right, he said finally. But you know what? You're already 10 times as good as anyone I know. That made her smile, the bright, gap-toothed grin that could light up his darkest days. Hours later, that same smile would be replaced by tears and confusion as a stranger struck her for simply existing in a space some believed she didn't deserve. The contract Cliff was traveling to sign had been the culmination of 18 months of work. SecureNex had competed against tech giants with thousands of employees and billions in resources. His team of 30 had worked around the clock, refining their proposal, demonstrating their innovative approach to federal cybersecurity. When the call came that they'd won, Cliff had sat alone in his office for an hour, tears streaming down his face. Not just for himself, but for every black entrepreneur who'd been told no because of their skin color rather than their capabilities. We did it, V, he whispered to his late wife's photo on his desk. They couldn't keep us out. The contract signing in Washington was supposed to be ceremonial, a photo opportunity with federal officials, a press release announcing the partnership. Cliff had decided to bring Mariah not just as a mini vacation but as a lesson. This is what's possible when you refuse to accept the limitations others place on you. Now, as they sat in the airport security office after the incident, ice pack pressed to Mariah's cheek, that lesson had taken a darker turn. Does your face still hurt, baby? Cliff asked softly. Mariah nodded, her eyes downcast. Why did that lady hit me, Daddy? How do you explain hatred to a child? How do you tell your daughter that some people will hate her simply because of her skin color? That her achievements might make that hatred even stronger? Before Cliff could answer, Director Masters entered the room, closing the door firmly behind him. Mr. Warren, we need to talk privately, he said, glancing meaningfully at Mariah. A female agent appeared in the doorway. Mariah, would you like to see our special security dogs? They're very friendly. After Cliff's reassuring nod, Mariah left with the agent, though not without a backward glance at her father. Once alone, Director Masters' professional demeanor shifted slightly, revealing genuine concern. What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room, he began, taking the seat across from Cliff. The Bureau has been investigating a coordinated effort to intimidate and sabotage minority business owners who secure government contracts. Cliff leaned forward. And you think what happened to my daughter is connected to that? I know it is, Masters replied, sliding a tablet across the table. This was posted in a private messaging group 3 days ago. The screen showed a message, Warren and daughter on AA Flight 1382 May 15th. First class. Make an example. Cliff felt his blood run cold. They targeted my child deliberately? Masters nodded grimly. The woman who assaulted your daughter, Patricia Aldridge, has connections to 3 known white nationalist groups. She's been with the airline for over 2 decades, using her position to harass minority passengers. But this is the first time she's escalated to physical assault. Because she was ordered to, Cliff said, the realization dawning with horrifying clarity. Exactly. And here's where it gets worse. The group behind this has infiltrated multiple service industries. Airlines, hotels, rental car companies, security firms. They call themselves Guardians of Service, and their stated goal is to protect traditional American spaces from invasion. Cliff's jaw tightened. Traditional meaning white. Precisely. And they've become increasingly bold. Your government contract represents exactly what they're fighting against. Black excellence reaching the highest levels of business and government partnership. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about one racist flight attendant. This was organized, strategic hatred aimed directly at him and his child. What happens now? Cliff asked, his mind racing to the contract signing scheduled for tomorrow, and to his daughter's safety. Director Masters' expression was grave. Now you have a choice to make. We can protect you, get you to Washington under federal escort and keep this quiet. Or what? Or you can help us bring down the entire network. If you're still with me, I want you to hit that like button right now. What you're about to hear next reveals how deep this conspiracy went, and the incredible courage one father showed in the face of organized hatred. Cliff stared at the FBI director, weighing his options. His first instinct was protection. Get Mariah somewhere safe, sign his contract, and move on with their lives. But then he thought about the next black family that would board a plane. The next black entrepreneur who would achieve success. The next black child who would face hatred for simply existing in a traditional American space. What would helping you involve? He asked finally. Director Masters leaned forward. We need evidence of their entire operation. Ms. Aldridge is just one node in a vast network. With your cybersecurity expertise and our federal authority, we could potentially expose everyone involved, from ground-level operatives like Aldridge to the wealthy donors funding their activities. And my daughter? Would receive round-the-clock protection. My best agents. Cliff closed his eyes briefly, thinking of Vanessa. What would she advise? The answer came immediately. Fight for a world where Mariah can fly first class without fear. I'm in, he said, opening his eyes with new resolve. But my contract signing happens tomorrow. I won't let them take that from me too. Director Masters nodded. We'll get you there. But from this moment forward, you and Mariah are under federal protection. As if summoned by her name, the door opened and Mariah returned, her face brightening at the sight of her father. Daddy? They have dogs that can smell bombs, she exclaimed, momentarily forgetting her earlier trauma. Cliff pulled her into a tight hug, meeting Director Masters' eyes over her shoulder. A silent understanding passed between them. Whatever happened next, Mariah's safety came first. What neither man knew was that the Guardians of Service had contingency plans already in motion. The airport incident was just phase 1 of their operation to destroy Cliff Warren, professionally and personally. And their next move would make a public slap look like child's play. If you've experienced discrimination while traveling or in service industries, drop a comment below. Your stories help expose these realities and build awareness. Now, let's continue with what happened after Cliff agreed to help the FBI. Let's rewind to that morning at Dallas, Fort Worth International Airport and examine exactly what happened on that plane, because the details matter. Gate C-23 was bustling with early morning travelers. Business people in pressed suits tapped on laptops. Families corralled sleepy children. The smell of coffee from nearby kiosks hung in the air. Cliff and Mariah approached the priority boarding line, their first-class tickets ready. Cliff in a tailored navy suit that spoke of success without shouting it. Mariah in a yellow dress with white sneakers, her hair in neat braids adorned with colorful beads that clicked softly when she moved. The gate agent, a woman named Bethany Reynolds, looked up as they approached. Her smile faltered for a microsecond before reassembling itself into a professional mask. Good morning, Cliff said, presenting their boarding passes and IDs. Bethany examined their documents with unusual thoroughness. First class, she asked, though the boarding passes clearly indicated this. Yes, Cliff replied evenly, used to such questioning. She nodded, then pressed a button on her console. Moments later, Miss Patricia Aldridge appeared from the jet bridge. The two women exchanged glances. Is there a problem? Cliff asked. No problem at all, Bethany replied, her voice overly sweet. Ms. Aldridge will personally escort you to your seats. This special escort was not offered to the white businessman who boarded just before them. As they followed Ms. Aldridge down the jet bridge, Mariah whispered, Daddy, why is that lady looking at us funny? Children notice everything. They sense tension before adults name it. Cliff squeezed her hand reassuringly. Some people just wake up grumpy, princess. But it wasn't grumpiness. It was calculation. What investigators would later discover through phone records was that Bethany had sent a text message to a number associated with the Guardians of Service. Warren boarding now. Aldridge handling. The response came seconds later, make it count. Aboard the aircraft, Ms. Aldridge led them to seats 2A and 2B with mechanical politeness. Can I get you anything before takeoff? She asked, the question directed at the air between them rather than at Cliff or Mariah. Apple juice for my daughter, please, Cliff replied. Ms. Aldridge nodded curtly and moved away. What Cliff didn't notice, but security cameras later revealed, was that she paused to whisper to another flight attendant while preparing Mariah's drink. The second attendant glanced toward their seats, then nodded. When Ms. Aldridge returned with the juice, she placed it on Mariah's tray table with deliberate carelessness, nearly spilling it. Careful, she said with a coldness that made Mariah shrink back. These seats cost more than some people's monthly rent. The implication was clear. You don't belong here. Cliff felt his jaw tighten but maintained his composure. Thank you, he said firmly, helping Mariah secure the drink. Meanwhile, in seat 3C, FBI Director Alan Masters observed this interaction with interest. He hadn't planned to be on this flight. A last-minute schedule change had put him on the same aircraft as Cliff Warren, a coincidence that would prove fortunate. Masters had been tracking the Guardians of Service for months. Their pattern was becoming clear. Identify successful minority professionals, especially those with government connections, and subject them to escalating harassment in public spaces. The goal was twofold: immediate humiliation and long-term intimidation. What made this group particularly dangerous was their infiltration of service industries. They had members working as flight attendants, hotel staff, restaurant servers, and security personnel across the country. Positions that gave them daily opportunities to discriminate while hiding behind company policies and procedures. As the plane filled with passengers, Cliff helped Mariah get settled. He placed her tablet in the seat pocket, made sure her seatbelt was secure, and reminded her to sip her juice carefully. "After we take off, you can watch that science show you like," he told her, pulling up the program on her tablet. Mariah nodded excitedly. "And can we get cookies?" The flight attendant said they have warm cookies in first class. "Absolutely," Cliff smiled, momentarily forgetting the tension with Ms. Aldridge. That's when Director Masters first noticed something odd. Ms. Aldridge was watching them intently from the galley, speaking into her phone in hushed tones. Her body language suggested agitation, her eyes never leaving Cliff and Mariah. Masters made a mental note to observe her more closely. In his 30 years with the Bureau, he developed an instinct for trouble brewing. Right now, that instinct was on high alert. The boarding process continued. A white couple with a toddler took seats across the aisle. Ms. Aldridge immediately approached them with a warm smile. "Your first time flying with your little one? Let me bring you some extra pillows to make him comfortable," she offered, her entire demeanor transformed. The contrast was stark. The white family received warmth and proactive service. Cliff and Mariah received cold efficiency at best, thinly veiled hostility at worst. This dual treatment, what sociologists call disparate service, is often subtle enough that bystanders don't notice, but painful enough that recipients feel it acutely. As the final passengers boarded, Mariah reached for her juice. The plane shifted slightly as someone bumped past their row, causing the cup to slip from her small hands. The plastic cup hit the carpet with a soft thud. Apple juice splashed onto the floor and, unfortunately, onto Ms. Aldridge's shoes as she passed by their row. "I'm sorry," Mariah said immediately, her eyes wide with genuine remorse. What happened next occurred in less than 10 seconds but would change multiple lives forever. Ms. Aldridge looked down at her spattered shoes. Her face contorted with an anger disproportionate to the minor accident. "This is exactly what I expected," she hissed, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Cliff was already reaching for napkins from his pocket. "It was an accident. We'll clean it up." "Your kind always make messes for others to clean up," Ms. Aldridge continued, her voice rising. "First class has standards." The racial undertone was unmistakable. Several passengers looked up, uncomfortable with the escalating tension. Mariah, sensing the hostility directed at her, began to apologize again. "I didn't mean." That's when Ms. Aldridge did the unthinkable. She reached down and slapped Mariah across the face with enough force to snap the child's head to the side. The sound cracked through the cabin like a gunshot. Time seemed to stop. Passengers froze in shock. Mariah's eyes filled with tears, her hand rising slowly to her reddening cheek. Cliff stood up so quickly his head nearly hit the overhead bin. His face transformed with a father's rage, his body tensing as every protective instinct fired at once. But before he could speak or move further, Director Masters' authoritative voice cut through the stunned silence. "I suggest you step away from that child immediately." Ms. Aldridge turned, irritation flashing across her face at the interruption. Then she saw who had spoken. The small FBI pin on Masters' lapel caught the cabin light. Her expression shifted from anger to fear in an instant. "Sir, I was just..." "You were just assaulting a minor," Masters interrupted, standing now. "Step back and call your captain. This aircraft isn't going anywhere. If you're watching this and feeling outraged, hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared so we can expose the reality of what happens when hatred goes unchecked." The next few minutes were chaos. Passengers murmured and pointed. Some recorded with their phones. The lead flight attendant rushed forward, quickly grasping the severity of the situation when Director Masters quietly showed his credentials. Cliff gathered Mariah into his arms, his daughter sobbing against his chest. The red handprint on her cheek stood out starkly against her brown skin. "It's okay, baby," he whispered, though nothing about this was okay. "I've got you." The captain emerged from the cockpit, his face grave as Director Masters explained the situation in low tones. Ms. Aldridge stood nearby, her earlier confidence evaporated, replaced by a nervous defiance. "All passengers, we apologize for the delay," the captain announced over the intercom. "We're experiencing a security situation that requires attention before departure. Please remain seated." Security personnel boarded the aircraft. Ms. Aldridge was escorted off the plane, but not before she turned to glare at Cliff and Mariah one last time. "You people always find a way to cause trouble," she spat, loud enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. The racial slur hung in the air, removing any doubt about her motivations. Passengers gasped. Someone muttered, "Disgusting." Another passenger called out, "Get her off this plane." As Ms. Aldridge was led away, Director Masters approached Cliff and Mariah. "Mr. Warren? I'm Alan Masters, FBI. I'd like you and your daughter to come with me. We need to document what happened, and your daughter should have that cheek examined." Cliff nodded, still holding Mariah protectively. "Thank you for stepping in." Masters' expression was grim. "What happened here goes beyond one flight attendant's actions. I have reason to believe your family was specifically targeted." This statement sent a chill through Cliff. Targeted? Why? That's what we need to discuss. But not here. The remaining passengers were informed that the flight would be delayed while a new crew was brought in. Many expressed support for Cliff and Mariah as they were escorted off the plane. "I'm so sorry this happened to your little girl," an elderly white woman told Cliff as they passed her row. "I got it all on video," a young man assured him. "If you need it for a lawsuit." These small gestures of solidarity provided some comfort, but Cliff's mind was racing with questions. How could a flight attendant feel entitled to strike a child? And what did Masters mean by targeted? In the airport security office, a medical professional examined Mariah's cheek while Cliff gave his statement. The slap had left a clear handprint but no lasting physical damage. The emotional trauma, however, was evident in Mariah's unusual silence and the way she flinched when the doctor reached toward her face. "Is the bad lady going to jail?" Mariah finally asked in a small voice. Cliff exchanged glances with Director Masters, who nodded slightly. "Yes, Princess. What she did was wrong and against the law. She'll face consequences." What Cliff didn't tell her was that Ms. Aldridge was already out on bail, released within hours of her arrest. Or that her bail had been posted by a lawyer connected to a wealthy donor who funded the Guardians of Service. If you've made it this far in the video, you're about to discover how this incident was just the tip of the iceberg. Comment below if you've ever witnessed or experienced discrimination while traveling. Your stories help build awareness about these ongoing issues. After Mariah fell asleep on a cot in the security office, exhausted from crying, Director Masters showed Cliff evidence that changed everything. This was posted in a private messaging group used by members of a white nationalist organization, he explained, displaying a screenshot on his tablet. The message read, "Warren contract signing tomorrow. Operation Pushback begins. Phase 1, Public Humiliation. Phase 2, Contract Interference. Phase 3, Personal Destruction." Attached was Cliff's flight information, hotel reservation, and a photo of Mariah taken outside her school. Cliff felt physically ill. "They've been watching my daughter?" Masters nodded grimly. "The organization calls itself Guardians of Service. They target successful minorities, especially those securing government contracts or high-profile positions. Their stated goal is to protect traditional American institutions from diversity mandates." "And by traditional they mean white," Cliff said, his voice tight with anger. "Exactly. What makes them particularly dangerous is their infiltration strategy. They place members in service positions, flight attendants, hotel staff, security personnel, where they can discriminate while hiding behind company policies." Cliff looked at his sleeping daughter, her cheeks still faintly red from the slap. "So what happened today?" "Was planned," Masters confirmed. Ms. Aldridge was instructed to create an incident. The juice spill just gave her the opportunity she was looking for. The realization that his child had been deliberately targeted sent a wave of cold fury through Cliff. This wasn't random racism. This was calculated hatred aimed at his family because of his success. "What happens now?" he asked, his protective instincts in overdrive. Director Masters leaned forward. "That depends on you. We can arrange protection, get you to Washington safely for your contract signing, and continue our investigation independently. Or what? Or you can help us bring down the entire network." If you want to know what choice Cliff made, and how it led to one of the largest domestic terrorism investigations in recent FBI history, make sure you've hit that subscribe button. The next part of this story reveals just how deep this conspiracy went. The decision to help the FBI wasn't easy for Cliff. As a father, his first instinct was to protect Mariah. Get her somewhere safe, away from people who would harm her because of her skin color. But as a black man in America, he understood something profound. Running wouldn't solve the problem. The Guardians of Service would still exist, targeting other families, other children. If I help you, Cliff asked Director Masters, what exactly would that involve? They sat in a private room at the FBI's Dallas field office. Mariah was in an adjacent room, watched over by a female agent who'd brought coloring books and tablet games to distract her. We need evidence linking individual actors to the larger organization, Masters explained. Ms. Aldridge's assault on your daughter gives us cause to investigate her communications, but we need more. We need to map the entire network, from ground-level operatives to leadership. Cliff nodded slowly. And my cybersecurity expertise comes in how? These groups use encrypted messaging apps and private servers. They're careful. But with your skills and our legal authority, we might be able to trace their communications infrastructure. Masters slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos of men and women in various uniforms, airline staff, hotel employees, security personnel. Each face had been circled in red. These are confirmed members of the Guardians, working in the Dallas-Fort Worth area alone. We suspect there are hundreds more nationwide. Cliff flipped through the photos, a chill running through him. How many of these people had he encountered without knowing? How many had served him food, checked his ID, or stood behind him in line while harboring violent hatred? And my contract signing in Washington? Cliff asked. It's scheduled for tomorrow morning. We'll get you there, Masters assured him. In fact, it's crucial you proceed as normal. If you suddenly cancel after today's incident, they'll know something's up. Cliff thought of Mariah. And my daughter? We'll have round-the-clock protection. My best agents. After a moment's consideration, Cliff nodded. I'm in. But I want to be clear. My priority is keeping Mariah safe. If at any point I feel this puts her at additional risk, I'm out. Understood, Masters agreed. We'll start by having you continue to Washington as planned, but with our agents as security. Meanwhile, we'll begin surveillance on key Guardians members, starting with those who had direct contact with Ms. Aldridge. What neither man realized was how quickly the Guardians would escalate their plans once Phase 1 failed. If you're still with me, hit that like button. What you're about to hear shows just how organized and dangerous these hate groups can be, and why we need to expose them. 6 hours after the airport incident, Cliff and Mariah boarded a private FBI jet to Washington, D.C. 2 agents accompanied them, posing as Cliff's business associates. Mariah, exhausted from the day's trauma, fell asleep shortly after takeoff. Cliff used this time to review the contract he would sign tomorrow, a $40 million cybersecurity deal that would transform his company. But his mind kept drifting to the photos Masters had shown him. The faces of people who believed his success threatened their world. His phone buzzed with a news alert. He opened it to find footage of the airport incident already circulating online. Someone had recorded Ms. Aldridge slapping Mariah, and the video had gone viral. The comments section was a battlefield. Disgusting racism. Fire her immediately. We don't know what happened before the video started. Maybe the kid was misbehaving. This is what happens when people who can't afford first class try to play rich. Cliff closed the app, his stomach churning. Even with clear video evidence, some people would still justify violence against a black child. When they landed in D.C., an unmarked SUV was waiting on the tarmac. The agents efficiently transferred Cliff and Mariah to the vehicle and drove them to their hotel, the Madison Grand, one of Washington's most prestigious addresses. We've swept your suite, one agent informed him, and we have personnel stationed throughout the hotel. You're secure here. Cliff nodded gratefully, carrying a sleeping Mariah to the elevator. As they ascended to the penthouse level, he allowed himself a moment of pride. Despite everything, tomorrow he would sign a contract that many said a black-owned firm could never secure. The suite was luxurious, 2 bedrooms, a living area, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Capitol. Cliff tucked Mariah into bed, kissing her forehead gently. Her cheek no longer showed marks from the slap, but he knew the invisible wounds would take longer to heal. "Daddy?" she murmured, half asleep. "Yes, princess?" "Are there bad people in Washington too?" The question broke his heart. "There are good and bad people everywhere, Mariah. But right now there are very good people making sure we're safe." She seemed satisfied with this answer and drifted back to sleep. Cliff watched her for a moment, then returned to the living area where his laptop waited. He had work to do. While the FBI had their methods, Cliff had skills they didn't. As a cybersecurity expert, he understood how digital footprints worked, how even the most careful organizations left traces online. He began with Patricia Aldridge, the flight attendant who'd assaulted Mariah. Using techniques that skirted the edge of legality, but which he'd justify as helping a federal investigation. He traced her digital presence. What he found confirmed Masters' suspicions. Aldridge belonged to multiple private groups on social media platforms. She used encrypted messaging apps linked to known white nationalist organizations. And most disturbing, she had searched Cliff's name repeatedly in the weeks before their flight. This wasn't random. She had studied him, learned his schedule, prepared for their encounter. As Cliff dug deeper, a pattern emerged. Aldridge communicated regularly with a network of other service industry employees, hotel staff, restaurant workers, security personnel. Their messages contained coded language, but the intent was clear. Identify and harass minority customers, especially those perceived as successful. At 1 a.m., Cliff's phone rang. It was Director Masters. "Warren, we have a problem. Turn on the news." Cliff grabbed the remote and switched on the television. A breaking news banner scrolled across the screen. Flight attendant claims self-defense in viral slapping incident. The camera cut to Patricia Aldridge, standing outside a courthouse with a lawyer. Her face was tear-streaked, her posture deliberately vulnerable. "I feared for my safety," she claimed, voice quavering. "The child's father became aggressive when I asked them to follow proper first-class procedures. I reacted instinctively to protect myself." Cliff stared in disbelief. It was a complete fabrication, directly contradicted by video evidence, yet delivered with convincing emotion. "She's trying to flip the narrative," Masters said grimly. "Make herself the victim." But the video clearly shows. They're claiming the video was edited. That it doesn't show you threatening her first. Cliff felt sick. It was a tactic as old as racism itself. Portray the black man as threatening, violent, dangerous. Paint the white woman as vulnerable, frightened, justified in her actions. "What does this mean for the investigation?" Cliff asked. "It means they're organized and media savvy. They've already got sympathetic outlets picking up her version. But don't worry, we have the unedited security footage from multiple angles. The truth is on our side." After hanging up, Cliff couldn't sleep. He returned to his laptop, more determined than ever to expose the truth. By morning, he had compiled a disturbing dossier. The Guardians of Service wasn't just a loose network of racists. It was a structured organization with funding, leadership, and strategic goals. Their members had infiltrated service positions across the country, creating what they called comfort zones, where they could exercise power over minorities. But what truly chilled Cliff was discovering their Phase 2 and Phase 3 plans for him specifically. Phase 2. Contract interference involved planting rumors about SecureNexus security protocols, suggesting the firm had ties to foreign entities, and pressuring government officials to reconsider the contract. Phase 3. Personal destruction was darker still, plans to fabricate evidence of financial impropriety, hack his company's systems, and even suggestions of using Mariah as leverage. These people weren't just racist. They were domestic terrorists using their positions in everyday America to wage war on black success. If you're feeling outraged right now, you should be. Drop a comment below if you believe these organized hate groups need to be exposed and dismantled. The morning of the contract signing dawned bright and clear. Cliff dressed carefully in his best suit, charcoal gray with subtle blue pinstripes, a power tie, and the gold cufflinks Vanessa had given him on their last anniversary. "You look handsome, Daddy," Mariah said, watching him from the doorway of his bedroom. Despite everything, Cliff smiled. "And you look beautiful, Princess. Are you ready for your day with Agent Tanya?" While Cliff attended the signing ceremony, Mariah would remain at the hotel with a female agent who specialized in protective details for children. "We're going to the hotel pool," Mariah said, excitement briefly overcoming the wariness that had settled on her since the airport incident. "And then we might watch movies." "That sounds perfect," Cliff said, kneeling to her level. "I'll be back before dinner and then we can celebrate." What Cliff didn't tell her was that FBI agents would be stationed throughout the Department of Homeland Security building during the signing. Or that Director Masters had personally vetted everyone who would be in the room. The Guardians had already proven they could infiltrate airlines. Who knew where else their members might be positioned? As Cliff's SUV pulled up to the imposing government building, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We know where your daughter is. Walk away from the contract or she's next." Cliff's blood ran cold. He showed the message to the agent beside him, who immediately radioed it to his team. "Sir, we have multiple agents with your daughter. She's completely secure," the agent assured him. "This is an intimidation tactic." Cliff nodded, but his hands trembled slightly as he exited the vehicle. The threat against Mariah struck his deepest fear, that his success might put his child in danger. For a moment, he considered turning around, forgetting the contract, taking Mariah and disappearing somewhere safe. But then he thought about what that would mean, letting terrorists win. Teaching his daughter that intimidation works. Reinforcing the belief that Black Americans should know their place. No. He would not be driven away from his achievement by fear. Squaring his shoulders, Cliff entered the building. The signing ceremony was held in a wood-paneled conference room with American flags flanking a podium. Government officials in formal attire mingled with his team members who had flown in for the occasion. As Cliff moved through the room, shaking hands and accepting congratulations, he scanned faces, looking for signs of hostility for anyone who might be connected to the Guardians. The ceremony itself was brief but significant. Cliff signed his name with steady hands, officially securing the $40 million contract for SecureNex. Cameras flashed. Officials made speeches about innovation and diversity in government contracting. Throughout it all, Cliff maintained his professional demeanor, even as his phone periodically buzzed with more threatening texts from unknown numbers. This contract will be your downfall. We're watching your daughter swim right now. Black companies don't last long at this level. Each message was immediately forwarded to the FBI team. Each one strengthened Cliff's resolve to expose the people behind them. After the ceremony, as Cliff was preparing to leave, the Secretary of Homeland Security pulled him aside. "Mr. Warren, I want you to know that I'm aware of what happened on your flight yesterday," the secretary said quietly. "Disgusting behavior. Please be assured that this department stands firmly behind your company and this contract." Cliff thanked him, touched by the support but wondering if the secretary would be so supportive if he knew the full extent of what Cliff was uncovering about the Guardians. Because as Cliff had dug deeper into their communications, he'd found something disturbing: references to government allies. People in positions of power who sympathized with their cause. People who might be in this very building. The ride back to the hotel was tense. Cliff's phone had stopped receiving threatening texts, which somehow felt more ominous than their continuation. "Agent, I need to check on my daughter," he said as they approached the Madison Grand. "Of course, sir. But please stay with your security detail." The hotel lobby was busy with afternoon check-ins. Cliff moved briskly toward the elevators, flanked by two agents. As they waited, he noticed a hotel employee watching him with unusual intensity. The man's gaze wasn't casual, it was focused, assessing. When he caught Cliff looking back, he quickly turned away. "That man," Cliff murmured to one agent. "By the front desk. He was watching us." The agent nodded almost imperceptibly and spoke quietly into his wrist mic. Within seconds, another agent approached the hotel employee and engaged him in conversation. Cliff continued to the penthouse suite, his anxiety mounting with each floor the elevator climbed. Only when he saw Mariah happily building a fort out of sofa cushions with Agent Tanya, did he finally exhale. "Daddy," Mariah exclaimed, running to hug him. "Did you sign your big contract?" "I sure did, Princess," he said, lifting her into his arms. "Your dad officially has the biggest cybersecurity contract in the country." Her face lit up with pride. "Does that mean we're rich?" Cliff laughed, the sound releasing some of his tension. "It means our company is going to grow. And it means we're going to help keep a lot of important information safe." As Mariah returned to her fort building, Cliff's phone rang. It was Director Masters. "Warren, we need to talk. The hotel employee your agent identified? He's connected to the Guardians. And he had a key card to your suite." Cliff looked at Mariah, blissfully unaware of the danger. "Get us out of here. Now." Within 30 minutes they were relocated to a safe house in Virginia. A nondescript suburban home with reinforced doors and security systems that would impress even Cliff's tech team. That evening, as Mariah slept in a bedroom decorated to look like a normal child's room, though the windows were bulletproof, Cliff and Director Masters sat at the kitchen table reviewing what they knew. "The hotel employee confessed," Masters said. "He was instructed to gain access to your suite and plant listening devices. When pressed, he admitted the Guardians were planning something more serious for tonight." Cliff ran a hand over his face. "They're escalating faster than you expected. Much faster. Which tells me they're desperate. Your contract signing was supposed to be derailed. When that failed, they moved directly to intimidation and surveillance." "What's their end game here?" Cliff asked. "Even if they somehow sabotaged my contract, there would be others. Black entrepreneurs aren't going to disappear." Masters' expression was grave. "It's not just about your contract. You represent something they fear, proof that their worldview is wrong. That merit can triumph over prejudice. They need to make an example of you to discourage others." The reality of his situation hit Cliff with new clarity. This wasn't just about him or even his company. He had become a symbol in a larger war, a war between America's promise of equality and its long history of racial hierarchy. So what now? He asked. Masters leaned forward. Now we use their desperation against them. They've made mistakes in their haste. Left digital fingerprints. Given us threads to pull. Cliff nodded, his resolve hardening. And I think I know where to start pulling. If you've made it this far, you're about to discover how one man's expertise helped unravel a nationwide conspiracy of hate. Hit that subscribe button to make sure you don't miss what happens next. That night, with FBI cybersecurity experts at his side, Cliff began the meticulous work of tracing the Guardian's digital infrastructure. His years of experience breaking through security systems, legally for his clients, gave him insights the FBI agents lacked. They're using a distributed network, he explained, fingers flying across his keyboard. Multiple servers, encrypted channels, frequent IP changes. But they're making one critical mistake. What's that? Asked the lead FBI tech agent. They're humans, Cliff said simply. And humans are creatures of habit. They reuse passwords. They log in from the same locations. They leave patterns. By dawn, they had identified 3 key servers used by the Guardian's leadership. With federal warrants quickly obtained, they gained access to message logs that revealed the true scope of the organization. The Guardians of Service had over 2,000 members nationwide. They had infiltrated airlines, hotels, restaurants, security firms, and even some government agencies. Their stated goal was to make America uncomfortable for those who don't belong. A chilling mission they pursued through coordinated harassment, discrimination, and occasionally, as with Mariah, violence. But most disturbing were the financial records. The Guardians received funding from wealthy donors, including CEOs of major corporations and at least 2 elected officials. This wasn't fringe extremism. This was hatred with resources, organization, and influence. As the investigation expanded, Cliff remained at the safe house with Mariah. He tried to maintain normalcy for her sake, helping with homework, watching movies, playing board games. But the weight of what they were uncovering hung heavy on him. One evening, as they sat on the porch swing within the safe house's secure perimeter, Mariah asked a question that caught him off guard. Daddy, are we in hiding because of what that lady did to me on the plane? Cliff considered how to answer truthfully without frightening her. Partly yes. There are some people who didn't want Daddy to get his big contract because of the color of our skin. And they might try to cause more trouble. Mariah was quiet for a moment, processing this. That's stupid, she finally said. Skin is just skin. It doesn't make you smart or not smart. Out of the mouths of babes, Cliff thought. You're absolutely right, princess. And most people know that. But some people are taught to be afraid of differences. Like monsters under the bed? She asked. Kind of, Cliff smiled. Except the monsters aren't real, but the fear is. Mariah nodded sagely. So they're afraid of us for no reason. Exactly. She leaned against him, her small body warm and trusting. I'm not afraid of them, Daddy. Not anymore. Cliff held her close, marveling at her resilience. That's my brave girl. What Cliff didn't tell her was that the investigation had uncovered something truly alarming. Phase 3 of the Guardian's plan for him included a coordinated cyber attack on SecureNext scheduled for tomorrow. An attack designed to plant false evidence of security breaches that would destroy his company's reputation and void his government contract. An attack that, thanks to their investigation, would now become the trap that caught the entire organization. If you want to see how Cliff and the FBI turn the tables on the Guardians of Service, make sure you've subscribed. The next part of this story shows how justice finally caught up to those who thought their hatred could hide behind uniforms and job titles. The safe house in Virginia became Cliff and Mariah's home for the next week. From the outside, it looked like any other suburban residence. 2-story brick with white trim, neatly maintained lawn, American flag by the front door. But inside it was a fortress and command center. FBI agents rotated shifts, maintaining constant surveillance. The basement had been converted into a cybersecurity hub where Cliff worked alongside federal experts to monitor the Guardian's communications and prepare for their anticipated attack on SecureNext. For Mariah, the agents tried to create normalcy. They brought in toys, books, and games. Agent Tanya, who had become Mariah's favorite, took her on adventures in the backyard, always within the property's secure perimeter. But children sense when things aren't right. One night, Cliff found Mariah sitting by her bedroom window, staring at the agents patrolling outside. Can't sleep, princess? He asked, sitting beside her. She shook her head. Daddy, Are the bad people going to find us? The question pierced his heart. No child should have to worry about being hunted. No, baby, he said firmly. These agents are the best in the world at keeping people safe. That's why we're here, so they can protect us while they catch the bad people. Mariah seemed to consider this. Like in my superhero movies? The good guys always win. Cliff smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. That's right. But in real life, do the good guys always win? The question hung in the air between them. Cliff thought about all the times in American history when justice had failed Black Americans. All the times when hatred had seemed to triumph over righteousness. But he also thought about progress, slow, painful but real. About how his own success would have been impossible for his grandfather's generation. Not always right away, he said carefully. Sometimes the good guys have to fight really hard. Sometimes it takes a long time. But in the end, if enough good people stand up together, yes, good wins. Mariah nodded, satisfied with this answer. Then we'll win. Because you're good, Daddy. And the FBI people are good too. Cliff hugged her close, wishing he shared her certainty. The next morning brought a development that shook even Director Masters' composure. An FBI agent who had been monitoring the Guardian's communications burst into the kitchen where Cliff was making breakfast for Mariah. Sir, we've intercepted something you need to see immediately. Cliff followed the agent to the basement command center, where Masters was already reviewing a document on a secure monitor. What is it? Cliff asked. Masters' face was grim. They've escalated beyond what we anticipated. This is a directive sent to Guardian's members in 3 states. He turned the monitor so Cliff could see. The message was chillingly direct. Warren contract signed. Digital intervention proceeding as planned. Physical intervention now authorized. Target has been located in Virginia safe house. Extraction team on standby. Primary target, Warren. Secondary target, child. Maximum impact required. Cliff felt the blood drain from his face. They know where we are. It appears so, Masters confirmed. Which means? We have a leak, Cliff finished. Someone inside the FBI is working with them. The realization changed everything. If the Guardians had infiltrated the FBI itself, nowhere was truly safe. We need to move you and Mariah immediately, Masters said, already issuing orders to his team. And we need to identify the leak before they can track your new location. Cliff's mind raced. The cyber attack on my company is still scheduled for today. If we disappear now, they'll know we're onto them. Masters considered this. What are you suggesting? I stay visible. Draw their attention. Meanwhile, get Mariah somewhere absolutely secure, somewhere only you know about. You want to use yourself as bait, Masters said, not a question but a statement. I want to end this, Cliff replied. For my daughter. For every Black child who deserves to fly first class without being assaulted. For every minority entrepreneur who deserves a fair shot. After a moment, Masters nodded. We'll need to be extremely careful about who knows the details. My most trusted agents only. Within an hour, a plan was in motion. Mariah would be moved to a secondary safe house known only to Masters and 3 agents with impeccable records. Cliff would return to Washington, D.C., ostensibly to check on his company operations, providing a visible target for the Guardians, while the FBI prepared to trace and capture anyone who attempted to approach him. The hardest part was explaining to Mariah why they needed to separate. But I want to stay with you, she protested, tears welling in her eyes. Cliff knelt to her level. I know, Princess, and I want to stay with you too. But right now, the best way for me to keep you safe is to help the FBI catch these people. And I can't do that if I'm worried about you being in danger. Will Agent Tanya stay with me? Yes, she'll be right there the whole time. And you'll have a special phone that can call me anytime. Mariah threw her arms around his neck. Promise you'll be careful? I promise, he whispered, holding her tight. And when this is all over, we're going to Disney World like I promised, okay? She nodded against his shoulder. Okay. If you're feeling the weight of this moment, hit that like button. The courage of this father and daughter reminds us what's truly at stake when we confront hatred. The separation was executed with military precision. Mariah left in an unmarked vehicle with Agent Tanya and 2 other agents. Cliff wasn't told their destination, a precaution in case he was captured and forced to reveal information. Meanwhile, Cliff returned to Washington, D.C. in a very public manner. He gave a brief interview to a technology journal about SecureNex's government contract. He visited his company's D.C. office. He even dined at a prominent restaurant where he was sure to be recognized. all while wearing a concealed bulletproof vest and with FBI agents disguised as business associates never more than a few feet away. The bait was set. Now they waited for the Guardians to strike. The cyber attack came first, exactly as their intelligence had predicted. At 2:14 p.m., SecureNexus servers were hit with a sophisticated intrusion attempt. Had Cliff not been prepared, it might have succeeded in planting false evidence of security breaches that would have violated his government contract. Instead, the attack triggered a trap. As the hackers attempted to breach SecureNexus systems, FBI cybersecurity experts traced the attack back to its source, a network of computers operated by members of the Guardians of Service. Within hours, raids were conducted at 12 locations across the country. 37 individuals were arrested on various charges related to cybercrime and conspiracy. But the physical threat remained. That evening, Cliff checked into the Madison Grand Hotel, the same hotel where the Guardians had previously attempted to access his suite. This time, however, every staff member had been vetted by the FBI. Every entrance was monitored. Every room on his floor was occupied by federal agents. At 11:42 p.m., Cliff's phone rang. It was Director Masters. "We've identified the leak," he said without preamble. "Junior agent in our tech division. He's been feeding information to the Guardians for months." "Have you arrested him?" "Not yet. We're watching him. He's our link to whoever's coming after you tonight." Cliff's mouth went dry. "So they are coming?" "Yes." The leak told his contact that you're alone at the Madison Grand. Room 1214. No security detail. "And Mariah? Is she safe?" "Completely. The leak doesn't know her location. Only myself and the 3 agents with her know where they are." After hanging up, Cliff paced his hotel room. The waiting was excruciating. Every sound in the hallway made him tense. Every shadow seemed to move. At 1:17 a.m., his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Look out your window." Cliff moved cautiously to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains. In the building across the street, a red laser dot appeared on the glass, the unmistakable sign of a sniper rifle's targeting system. His heart hammered against his ribs. Even knowing this was part of the plan, that FBI snipers had the building surrounded, the red dot was terrifying in its implication. Someone wanted him dead. Someone hated his success, his skin color, his very existence enough to put a bullet through his heart. Cliff stepped back from the window and texted Masters, "They're here." The response came immediately, "Stay down. Team moving in." For the next 20 minutes, Cliff lay flat on the floor of his hotel room, listening to his own breathing. Then his phone rang. "Masters again. We got them. 4-man team." They had rifles with night vision scopes, hotel staff uniforms and room key cards. They were planning to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. Cliff exhaled slowly. "All 4 in custody?" "Yes. And they're talking. Giving up names to save themselves." The relief was overwhelming. Cliff sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. "Is it over?" "The immediate threat to you and Mariah, yes. The larger organization? We're just getting started." If you're still with me, comment below with a raised fist medium skin tone to show solidarity. The story I'm about to tell you next reveals how deep this conspiracy truly went, and how many powerful people were involved. By dawn, Cliff was reunited with Mariah at a new secure location. She ran to him the moment he walked through the door, launching herself into his arms with such force he nearly stumbled. "Daddy? Agent Tanya said you caught the bad guys." Cliff held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid reality of her in his arms. "Some of them, Princess. The ones who were trying to hurt us." Over Mariah's head, he met Agent Tanya's eyes. She nodded slightly, confirmation that Mariah had been protected not just physically but emotionally. She didn't know how close her father had come to being assassinated. The next week passed in a blur of debriefings, evidence reviews and witness statements. The FBI's operation had yielded results beyond their expectations. The arrests of the cyber attackers and the assassination team had created a panic within the Guardians of Service. Members began turning on each other, offering information in exchange for leniency. The organization was unraveling. 10 days after the hotel incident, Director Masters requested a private meeting with Cliff. They sat in a secure conference room at FBI headquarters, the weight of what they'd uncovered evident in Masters' expression. "We've mapped the entire network," he began, spreading files across the table. "Over 2,000 members in 47 states. Hundreds in service positions, airlines, hotels, restaurants. Dozens in security firms. And most concerning, 43 in government agencies. Cliff leafed through the files, recognizing some names from news headlines and corporate boards. How long has this been going on? The Guardians in its current form? About 5 years. But it evolved from older hate groups. Same ideology, new methods. And their funding? Masters slid forward a particular file. That's where it gets complicated. The money trail leads to some very powerful people. The list of financial backers included CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, wealthy political donors, and even a sitting federal judge. People with the resources to fund a nationwide network of hatred, and the influence to potentially shield it from consequences. This is bigger than I imagined, Cliff said quietly. Yes. And that's why what happens next is so important. Masters leaned forward. We're preparing to move against the leadership and financial backers. But before we do, we need to decide how public this becomes. Cliff frowned. What do you mean? Some in the Justice Department want to handle this quietly. Individual prosecutions, plea deals, minimal publicity. Their argument is that exposing the full scope could damage public trust in institutions. And let the powerful people behind it save face, Cliff added, understanding immediately. Masters nodded. Exactly. The alternative is full transparency. Press conferences. Public trials. Exposing everyone involved, regardless of their position or influence. Which do you support? Transparency, Masters said without hesitation. But I'm not the only voice in this decision. And some very powerful people are pushing for the quiet approach. Cliff sat back, considering the implications. The quiet approach would mean justice of a sort. Some people would be punished. But the full truth would remain hidden. The public would never know how deeply racism had infiltrated their daily experiences. What do you need from me? He asked finally. Your testimony would be crucial in public trials. But it would mean putting yourself and Mariah in the spotlight. More media attention. Possibly threats from sympathizers who remain at large. The choice was clear to Cliff, but he needed to consider Mariah. She had already endured trauma no child should face. Could he ask her to potentially face more? That evening, he had a careful conversation with his daughter. Mariah, remember how I told you that sometimes good people have to fight really hard to win? She nodded, looking up from her coloring book. Well, now we have a choice about how to fight. We can help put away the people who tried to hurt us, but it might mean talking to judges and maybe even being on TV. People might say mean things about us. Mariah considered this with the seriousness only children can bring to important matters. Would it help other kids like me? So they don't get hit by mean ladies on planes? Cliff's throat tightened with emotion. Yes, princess. It might help a lot of kids like you. Then we should do it, she said simply. Mom always said we should help people when we can. Cliff pulled her into a hug, his eyes damp. Your mom was very wise. The next day, Cliff informed Director Masters of his decision. We'll testify. Publicly. The world needs to know what these people have been doing. Masters nodded, relief evident in his expression. Thank you. This won't be easy, but it's the right thing. One condition, Cliff added. I want to be involved in the press strategy. This story needs to be told the right way, not sensationalized, not minimized. The truth in all its ugliness. Agreed. We'll need to move quickly once we start making arrests. The leadership and financial backers will have resources to flee or destroy evidence. Within 48 hours, the FBI launched coordinated raids across the country. The Guardians of Service Leadership, a council of 7 individuals who directed the organization's activities, were arrested simultaneously in different cities. The financial backers proved more challenging. Some had already been tipped off by sympathizers within law enforcement. Others had legal teams that immediately began fighting the charges. But the evidence was overwhelming: bank transfers, encrypted communications, recorded meetings. The case that had begun with a slap on an airplane was now exposing one of the largest organized hate groups in modern American history. If you're outraged by what you're hearing, hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared so we can expose the reality of organized racism in America. 3 weeks after the raids, Cliff and Director Masters held a joint press conference. The media room at FBI headquarters was packed with journalists from every major outlet. Cameras flashed as Cliff approached the podium, Masters standing supportively at his side. My name is Clifford Warren, he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. 3 months ago, my 9-year-old daughter was assaulted on an airplane by a flight attendant who objected to our presence in first class. What we didn't know then was that this assault was part of a coordinated campaign by an organization called the Guardians of Service. He detailed the organization's structure, methods, and goals: to intimidate minorities out of spaces they considered traditionally white, to sabotage minority-owned businesses that secured government contracts, and ultimately, to preserve racial hierarchy in American society. This wasn't random racism, Cliff emphasized. This was organized, funded, and strategic. The Guardians placed members in service positions specifically to discriminate against people of color. They targeted successful minorities for harassment and sabotage. And in my case, when other methods failed, they authorized violence, first against my child, then against me. The room was silent, journalists scribbling frantically or recording every word. With the FBI's help, this organization has been exposed and dismantled. But the ideology behind it remains. The belief that some Americans deserve better treatment than others based on skin color. The fear that black success somehow diminishes white prosperity. Cliff paused, making eye contact with various reporters. My daughter asked me if good guys always win in real life. I told her not always right away. Sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it takes courage from many people standing together. Today I'm asking all Americans to stand against organized hatred. To recognize it when you see it. To report it when you experience it. And to never accept it as normal. As questions erupted from the press corps, Cliff's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from Agent Tanya, who was watching Mariah at a secure location. Mariah saw you on TV. She says to tell you she's proud of her daddy. So am I. In that moment, despite the chaos around him, despite the long road of trials and testimony ahead, Cliff felt something he hadn't experienced since the day on the plane: peace. The fight wasn't over. Some Guardians members remained at large. Some financial backers would use their wealth and influence to avoid consequences. The ideology would find new expressions, new organizations. But a powerful blow had been struck against organized racism. A message had been sent: hatred cannot hide behind uniforms or job titles. It will be exposed. It will be confronted. It will be defeated. And most importantly, Mariah now lived in a world where justice was possible, where a black child could be assaulted for existing in first class, and the systems of power would respond not with indifference but with righteous action. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, I want you to know that while this specific case is dramatized, the reality it represents is all too real. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts or experiences. Your voice matters in this ongoing conversation about race in America. Now, let's look at what happened after the press conference, as the full scope of the Guardian's activities became public knowledge. The press conference ignited a firestorm. Within hours, #GuardiansExposed was trending nationwide. News outlets ran special reports detailing the organization's activities. Social media exploded with people sharing their own experiences of discrimination in service industries. Moments they had previously dismissed as isolated incidents now recognized as potentially part of a coordinated campaign. For Cliff, the days following the press conference were a whirlwind. Interview requests flooded in. Death threats arrived alongside messages of support. SecureNexus phone lines jammed with potential clients wanting to work with the company that had helped expose a nationwide hate group. Through it all, Cliff maintained his focus on two priorities: Mariah's well-being and seeing justice served. "How are you holding up?" Director Masters asked during one of their daily briefings. They sat in a secure FBI conference room, reviewing the latest arrests and case developments. "Managing," Cliff replied honestly. "Mariah's nightmares have decreased. The therapist says she's processing everything remarkably well." "And you?" Cliff paused. Few people asked how he was doing. Everyone assumed the successful entrepreneur, the man who helped bring down a hate group, must be handling everything perfectly. "I'm angry," he admitted finally. "Not just about what happened to us, but about how deep this goes. How many people were involved. How long it was allowed to continue." Masters nodded. "The scope is disturbing. Even to someone who spent decades investigating hate groups. The numbers were staggering. In the months since the press conference, federal agents had arrested over 700 Guardians members across 42 states. They had identified 126 corporations with employees involved in the organization, including 18 airlines, 31 hotel chains, and dozens of security firms. Most disturbing were the 43 government employees, ranging from DMV clerks to federal agency staffers, who had used their positions to target minorities. "The financial investigation is where we're meeting the most resistance," Masters continued, sliding a folder across the table. "These people have resources, expensive lawyers, political connections. Cliff opened the folder to find profiles of the Guardian's top financial backers. CEOs. Old money families. A federal judge. 2 state senators. They're claiming they didn't know what their money was funding, Cliff noted, scanning the legal statements. Standard defense. Masters agreed. But we have recordings from their planning meetings. Emails discussing specific operations. They knew exactly what they were supporting. The evidence was damning, but Cliff had lived long enough as a black man in America to know that evidence didn't always lead to consequences, not when the accused had wealth and power. What can I do? He asked. Testify, Masters said simply. The grand jury hearings start next week. Your testimony will be crucial, especially regarding the attempt on your life and the targeting of Mariah. Cliff nodded. I'll be there. But I want something in return. Name it. I want to meet Patricia Aldrich. Face to face. Masters' eyebrows rose. The flight attendant who assaulted Mariah? Why? I need to understand, Cliff said. Not just for the case but for myself. How someone could look at a 9-year-old child and strike her because of her skin color. After a moment's consideration, Masters nodded. I'll arrange it. But I should warn you, she's not remorseful. She still believes in the Guardian's mission even from jail. I'm counting on that, Cliff replied. I don't want an apology. I want the truth. If you're wondering why someone would want to face their child's abuser, hit that like button. Sometimes confronting hatred directly is the only way to truly understand it and defeat it. 3 days later, Cliff sat in an interview room at the Federal Detention Center where Patricia Aldrich awaited trial. The woman who entered, escorted by guards, looked smaller than he remembered. Her flight attendant's uniform replaced by an orange jumpsuit, her confident posture now slightly hunched. But her eyes, they still held the same cold disdain when they landed on him. Mr. Warren, she said, her voice flat as she took the seat across from him. Ms. Aldrich, he replied evenly. For a moment, they simply regarded each other across the metal table. Predator and prey, except the roles had been reversed. Now she was the one caged. I'm curious why you wanted this meeting, she finally said. If you're expecting an apology, you're wasting your time. I'm not, Cliff assured her. I want to understand. Understand what? How you could strike a child. My child. For spilling juice. Patricia's expression hardened. It wasn't about juice. I know, Cliff said quietly. It was about her being black in first class. It was about maintaining standards, she countered. About protecting spaces that have traditionally represented excellence and achievement. And you believe black people lower those standards? I believe in natural order, she said, leaning forward slightly. Every species has hierarchy. Lions don't apologize for being apex predators. They don't pretend zebras are their equals. The naked racism took Cliff's breath away. Not because it was surprising but because of how calmly, how confidently she expressed it, as if stating simple facts rather than hateful ideology. That's how you see us? As a different species? I see you as trying to claim achievements and positions you haven't earned, she replied. Your government contract? Do you really believe you got that based on merit alone? Cliff felt a flash of anger but kept his voice steady. SecureNex won that contract because our security protocols were superior to our competitors. Because my team worked harder, innovated more, and delivered better results. Patricia smiled thinly. That's what they let you believe. And my daughter? What threat did she pose to your natural order? Something flickered in Patricia's eyes, not remorse but perhaps discomfort. Children learn what they see. Your daughter was learning that she belonged in spaces reserved for excellence. And you thought hitting her would teach her otherwise. I thought it would teach both of you that actions have consequences. Cliff leaned forward, meeting her gaze directly. They certainly do. You're facing federal charges for assault, civil rights violations, and conspiracy. You'll likely spend decades in prison. For the first time, Patricia's confidence wavered. The Guardians have powerful friends. This isn't over. You're right about that, Cliff agreed. But not in the way you think. Your organization has been exposed. Your members are being arrested daily. Your financial backers are facing indictments. He stood, having heard enough. You struck my daughter thinking you were protecting some natural order. Instead, you triggered its destruction. As he turned to leave, Patricia called after him. We're not the only ones, you know. There are others. Different names, same purpose. This won't end with us. Cliff paused at the door. You're right. Racism doesn't end with one organization. But every time we expose it, every time we confront it, we weaken its hold. That's what you did when you slapped my daughter? You showed your true face to the world. And the world rejected it. The meeting left Cliff shaken but resolved. Patricia Aldridge wasn't a monster, and that was perhaps the most disturbing realization. She was a human being who had embraced a poisonous ideology so completely that striking a child seemed justified in her mind. If you're still with me, drop a comment with your thoughts. How do we address hatred that runs this deep? Your perspective matters in this conversation. The grand jury hearings began the following week. For 5 days, Cliff testified about everything, from the initial assault on Mariah to the assassination attempt at the hotel. He presented evidence from his own investigation into the Guardian's digital infrastructure. He named names, dates, operations. Through it all, he remained composed, factual, and determined. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about truth. On the final day of his testimony, as he exited the courthouse, he found a crowd gathered on the steps. Not protesters or media, but ordinary citizens, many of them black and brown, holding signs of support. Thank you for speaking up. Justice for Mariah. Expose hate everywhere. A woman approached him, her eyes damp with emotion. My son was denied service at a hotel last year. The manager said his credit card was declined, but it wasn't. I always wondered if it was because of his skin color. Now I know it might have been part of something bigger. Thank you for fighting back. Similar stories poured in as Cliff made his way through the crowd. People sharing experiences of discrimination that suddenly made new sense in light of the Guardian's revelations. That evening, as Cliff recounted the day to Director Masters over a secure phone line, he felt both exhausted and energized. The grand jury voted to indict all 37 financial backers, Masters informed him, including Judge Harmon and Senators Whitfield and Pearson. Will it stick? Cliff asked, the practical businessman in him still skeptical of consequences for the powerful. The evidence is overwhelming, and public pressure is intense. These aren't the days when powerful men could quietly make scandals disappear. After hanging up, Cliff checked on Mariah, who was building an elaborate fort in the living room of their new home, a house in a gated community with security systems that would impress even the most paranoid. Daddy, come see my fort, she called, her face lighting up at the sight of him. As he crawled into the blanket structure, pretending to be amazed by her architectural skills, Cliff marveled at her resilience. The therapist had warned there might be lasting trauma, trust issues, fear of public spaces. But Mariah had processed the experience with remarkable strength. This is the control room, she explained, pointing to a pillow with her tablet on it. And this is where we monitor for bad guys. Very impressive security system, Cliff nodded seriously. Are there any bad guys on the radar today? Mariah shook her head. Nope. All clear. The FBI caught them all. If only it were that simple, Cliff thought. But he wouldn't burden her with the reality that Patricia Aldridge had spoken, that there were other groups, other hatreds, other battles to be fought. For now it was enough that Mariah felt safe again. The trials began 3 months later. One by one, members of the Guardians of Service faced justice. Patricia Aldridge was sentenced to 8 years for assaulting Mariah and for her role in the organization's leadership. The 4 men who had planned to assassinate Cliff received 20 years each. The financial backers fought harder, their expensive legal teams filing motion after motion. But as Masters had predicted, the evidence was too strong, the public attention too intense. One by one, they too were convicted of conspiracy, of funding domestic terrorism, of civil rights violations. Judge Harmon was removed from the bench. Senators Whitfield and Pearson resigned in disgrace. CEOs stepped down as their companies' stocks plummeted in the wake of the scandal. Throughout the trials, Cliff attended every day he could, often with other victims of the Guardian's discrimination. They formed a silent wall of witnesses, people whose lives had been impacted by organized hatred, now watching justice unfold. On the day the final verdict was delivered against the organization's founder, a wealthy businessman named Robert Thorne, Cliff sat in the courtroom with Mariah beside him. He had debated bringing her, but she had insisted on being there, to see the bad guys get in trouble. As the judge read the guilty verdict on all counts, Thorne turned in his seat, his eyes finding Cliff and Mariah in the gallery. His gaze was cold, hateful, but also defeated. Cliff met his stare evenly, one arm protectively around Mariah's shoulders. He didn't smile or gloat. He simply witnessed, a black man and his daughter, existing freely in a space where men like Thorne had tried to erase them. That, perhaps, was the greatest victory. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. Cliff lifted Mariah onto his shoulders so she wouldn't be lost in the crowd. Mr. Warren. How do you feel about the verdicts? Relieved, Cliff answered honestly. Not just for my family but for every person who has experienced discrimination and wondered if they were imagining it. Today confirms they weren't. What's next for you and SecureNex? Cliff smiled. We're fulfilling our government contract, expanding our team, and establishing a foundation to help minority entrepreneurs overcome barriers in the tech industry. And personally? Another reporter called out. Cliff looked up at Mariah, perched on his shoulders. Personally, I believe I promised someone a trip to Disney World. Mariah's delighted laugh rang out above the crowd, a sound of pure joy that no hatred could diminish. As they made their way through the media throng, Director Masters appeared at Cliff's side. Quite a journey from that flight 3 months ago, he observed. One I never would have chosen, Cliff replied. But maybe one that needed to happen. Masters nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes it takes something dramatic to expose what's been hiding in plain sight. The question is, will it make a difference? Will people remember this or will it fade into just another news cycle? That, Masters said, depends on people like you continuing to speak truth. To remind us that hatred doesn't just hurt its targets, it corrupts everything it touches. Cliff looked around at the crowd, diverse faces, cameras recording, the world watching. Then we'll keep speaking. If you believe in the power of exposing hatred wherever it hides, hit that subscribe button. Stories like Cliff and Mariah's remind us that justice is possible when brave people stand up for truth. The Guardians of Service had been dismantled. Its members imprisoned, its funding cut off, its operations exposed. But as Patricia Aldridge had warned, they weren't the only ones. Other groups with different names but similar purposes continued to operate in the shadows of American life. The fight wasn't over. Perhaps it never would be. But something had changed. A flight attendant had slapped a black child, not realizing that the FBI director was watching. And that single act of hatred had triggered a chain reaction that exposed one of the largest organized racist operations in modern American history. It was a reminder that sometimes, justice comes from unexpected places. Sometimes, the most powerful act of resistance is simply refusing to be erased. And sometimes, a father and daughter going to Disney World represents the greatest victory of all. The triumph of joy over hatred, of living freely in a world that tried to confine them. 1 year after the airport incident, Cliff Warren stood at a podium in the East Room of the White House. Behind him, the President of the United States waited to speak. Before him, an audience of civil rights leaders, law enforcement officials, and families who had been victimized by the Guardians of Service. When my daughter was struck on that plane, Cliff began, his voice steady, I had a choice to make. I could seek private justice, compensation, an apology, perhaps the firing of one flight attendant. Or I could ask the harder question, why did this happen? The room was silent, captivated. That question led to the exposure of a nationwide network of hatred. It revealed that what many of us experienced as random discrimination was actually coordinated, funded, and strategic. It showed us that racism isn't just personal prejudice, it can be organized like a business, with leadership, funding, and operational goals. Cliff paused, scanning the faces before him. Today, as the President signs the Service Industry Civil Rights Enforcement Act, we take a crucial step toward ensuring that what happened to my family doesn't happen to others. This legislation creates new protections, oversight mechanisms, and reporting systems to identify and address discrimination in customer service industries. The law, nicknamed the Warren Act by the media, had been fast-tracked through Congress with rare bipartisan support. It required service industries to implement anti-discrimination training, established anonymous reporting systems for employees who witnessed discriminatory practices, and increased penalties for companies that failed to address patterns of bias. But legislation alone isn't enough, Cliff continued. Laws can be enforced or ignored. Policies can be followed or circumvented. The real change must come from us, from our willingness to speak up when we witness injustice, to believe those who report discrimination, and to demand better from the institutions that serve us. As Cliff returned to his seat, the President stepped forward to sign the bill into law. In the front row, Mariah, now 10 years old, watched with solemn pride. Beside her sat Director Masters, who had become a friend and ally to the Warren family. The ceremony marked a public victory, but for Cliff, the private transformations were equally significant. SecureNex had tripled in size over the past year. The government contract that the Guardians had tried to sabotage had been completed ahead of schedule and under budget, leading to additional federal partnerships. More importantly, Cliff had established a mentorship program for minority students interested in cybersecurity, creating pathways for the next generation. For Mariah, the journey had been one of both healing and growth. The trauma of the assault had faded, though not disappeared entirely. She still occasionally had nightmares. She still sometimes tensed when flight attendants approached. But she had also discovered her voice, speaking to her school about her experience, participating in age-appropriate discussions about racism, and even helping Cliff review child-friendly sections of the Warren Act. If you're inspired by how this father and daughter turned trauma into positive change, hit that subscribe button. Their story reminds us that even the darkest moments can lead to transformation. After the White House ceremony, Cliff and Mariah walked through the National Mall, enjoying the spring cherry blossoms. They stopped at the Lincoln Memorial, climbing the steps to stand before the massive statue of the president who had signed the Emancipation Proclamation. "Daddy," Mariah said, reading the inscriptions on the wall, "do you think things are better now? Since Lincoln's time?" Cliff considered the question carefully. "Yes," he said finally. "Not perfect. Not even close. But better." "Because of laws?" "Partly. Laws matter. But mostly because of people who refused to accept injustice. People who spoke up, stood firm, and demanded change." Mariah nodded thoughtfully. "Like us." "Like you," Cliff corrected, squeezing her hand. "You were the brave one, princess. You told your story when it would have been easier to stay quiet." They stood in silence for a moment, looking out over the reflecting pool toward the Washington Monument. "The lady who hit me," Mariah said suddenly. "Is she still in jail?" "Yes. She'll be there for several more years." "Do you think she's sorry now?" Cliff thought about his meeting with Patricia Aldridge, the cold certainty in her eyes, the unwavering belief in her twisted ideology. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "Some people hold on to hatred so tightly that they can't let it go even when it destroys their own lives." "That's sad," Mariah said simply. "Yes, it is." As they descended the memorial steps, a young black family was coming up, parents with a daughter about Mariah's age. The girls noticed each other, exchanged smiles. "Hey, aren't you Mariah Warren?" the other girl asked, eyes widening with recognition. "From the airplane story? We learned about you in school." Mariah nodded, suddenly shy. "That's so cool. You helped change the law." The girl turned to her parents. "This is the girl I told you about." The parents approached, thanking Cliff and Mariah for their courage. What might have been a brief encounter became a conversation, then an invitation to get ice cream together. By sunset, phone numbers had been exchanged and a playdate arranged. This, Cliff realized, was perhaps the most meaningful outcome of their ordeal. Not just policy changes or legal victories, but human connections. Community strengthened through shared understanding. If you've experienced discrimination and felt alone in that struggle, know that your story matters. Comment below if this video has helped you feel seen or understood. The Guardians of Service had operated on the belief that America was a zero-sum game, that black success came at the expense of white prosperity, that diversity weakened rather than strengthened institutions. The reality proved exactly opposite. The exposure of their organization had led to more inclusive practices across service industries. Companies that implemented the Warren Act's recommendations saw improved customer satisfaction across all demographics. Security firms that diversified their hiring found they could better serve diverse communities. When hatred was removed from the equation, everyone benefited. 6 months after the White House ceremony, Cliff received a letter from an unexpected source, a former member of the Guardians who had served as a hotel manager in Chicago. "I joined because I was afraid," the letter read. "Afraid of becoming irrelevant in a changing world. Afraid of losing status and privilege. The Guardians gave that fear a target, people like you. But watching your dignity throughout this process, seeing how you fought hatred with truth rather than more hatred, made me question everything. I'm writing not to ask forgiveness, but to tell you that your example changed at least one person who once considered you an enemy." Cliff shared the letter with Mariah, who considered it with the wisdom children sometimes possess. "See, Daddy," she said. "Good guys do win. Sometimes it just takes a while." As America continues to wrestle with its complex racial history, stories like Cliff and Mariah Warren's remind us of an essential truth. Change happens when brave individuals refuse to accept injustice as normal. When they ask the harder questions. When they demand that America live up to its highest ideals rather than its darkest impulses. One flight. One slap. One FBI director watching. And a father and daughter who turned trauma into transformation. If this story moved you, please share it with others who need to hear it. Together, we can ensure that hatred never goes unchallenged and injustice never goes unexposed.